For as long as automakers have been making cars and motorcycle companies have been making motorbikes, we've had the phenomenon of bedroom wall poster models. Vehicles that were considered so aspirational, beautiful, quick, powerful or successful on the track that they graced millions of bedroom walls across the globe. More recently, those same models became favourite background images for many a smartphone or computer screen. And for many of us who grew up in the 1970s, 80s and 90s, bedrooms had some form of high-performance sports car adorning their walls. And anecdotally speaking, at least based on my experience growing up in the UK in the 1980s, that poster vehicle was most likely a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, or perhaps a Porsche. And yes, I know there were others too. I mean, I didn't have any car posters on my wall, but I know that I did think about putting a Morris Minor up there multiple times. Yeah, I know. I'm weird. Get used to it. The reason for Ferrari's poster child status is, I hope, pretty obvious. Ferrari was, many would rightly agree, at its cultural peak in the late 1970s and 80s. The Ferrari Dino 246 GT and GTS, the 208 in its various guises, and of course the wide stance of the monster-engined 512BB. And that's before we get to the F40 and the Testarossa, a car that spawned many a playground brawl over its nearest rival, the Lamborghini Countach. The Testarossa's placement in the iconic Outrun arcade game, which later came to early home computers, only cemented its position in history. In fact, when my late sister got her first computer before heading off to college, an Atari ST-FM with a positively mind-bending 512 kilobytes of memory, back in 1989, I remember begging her to let me play it. Partly because of the sound effects, and partly because I got to pilot something resembling a fast car from something resembling a driver's perspective. And since my sister was profoundly deaf, I knew she wouldn't mind if I cranked the volume up a little. At least, that's what it felt like to a weird 10-year-old who'd grown up in a carless household and desperately wanted a car of her own someday. But here's the thing about modern Ferraris. While they're almost certainly the most technically accomplished cars the company has ever built, they are a long way from the union of human and machine that their predecessors were often viewed as. The SF90, the 296 GTB, the F80, I could go on, are incredible exercises in engineering. When these cars work as designed, they are mechanically exceptional. The problem is that increasingly nobody actually drives them, and when they are purchased for driving, they're not exactly known for their Corolla-like reliability. They are instead purchased as investments, delivered to climate-controlled storage facilities, and sold at auctions with the delivery mileage still on the clock. Ferrari has quietly transformed from a car company into a luxury asset class that happens to make cars. The performance is real, the passion is increasingly not. And somewhere along the way, the poster on the bedroom wall became a line item on a balance sheet. And last week, Ferrari did something that many thought it never would. Unveiled a new car that is 100% electric. Not a concept, not a design impression, a real production electric Ferrari that you can buy if you happen to have $500,000 sitting around in an offshore account somewhere. It's called the Ferrari Luce, and it looks a little like it was designed by the team behind the late 90s Apple Macs. And that's because it was. Jony Ive, legendary former Apple industrial design guru, was the lead on this project, which does tell you a little about how Ferrari views this car and its position in the marketplace. The mainstream media appears split. Some are calling it a bold reinvention, others a betrayal. And former Ferrari chairman Luca di Montezemolo, not exactly known for being an EV advocate, stated he hoped Ferrari would remove the iconic prancing horse from the vehicle. And some investors are actually agreeing, with Ferrari's share price suffering a near 8% drop on its first full day of trading after said reveal. But Here at Transport Evolved, I think what the Luce actually reveals is something most outlets aren't talking about. The shocking and growing disparity between where legacy automakers are and what consumers actually want.
It's terrible.
Oh, you can say that.
It's amazing. All these facilities and you make a piece of crap like this.
This is the one, yes. Yes, I saw 3 of these parked outside the local Starbucks this morning, which tells me only one thing. There's too many self-indulgent wieners in this city with too much bloody money.
So what do you think?
There is no ashtray.
I'm offering you a brand new car which has the edge on Maserati.
The Maserati is faster, and it has an ashtray.
If I put in an ashtray, will you drive it?
A few days ago, someone commented on our 10 News Roundup show responding to my enthusiastic coverage of the Mercedes-Benz AMG GT 4-door coupe as a vehicle I'd love to have a go in, that we were, and I quote, advertising and drooling over performance cars which were designed and built to encourage their drivers to blatantly break, their laws and laugh at those following them. They also then went on to describe us as quote-unquote schizophrenic. And I will quietly note here that using that particular clinical mental health diagnosis as an insult is unwelcome, cruel, and factually incorrect, just like the overuse of the R word in recent years by people of certain political persuasions as some kind of all-encompassing mallet with which to hit people they disagree with. If your brain can't come up with suitable, less offensive terms for use, you should enroll in a writing course to broaden your lexicon. If you're going to try and insult folk, at least try to be creative and not offensive. Now, I want to acknowledge that comment here in this video because it feels relevant, and I'll be honest, personally, I sit firmly on the more practical end of the EV spectrum. None of my own electric vehicles are particularly performance-oriented, although they can all perform when required. So the drooling accusation is perhaps a little strong, but I would also push back on the suggestion that owning or appreciating a fast car makes you someone who willfully flouts the law. The reality is that the vast majority of people who buy high-performance vehicles do, in fact, respect the rules of the road because they respect other people, they respect the machinery, and they understand exactly what happens when things go wrong. Racing belongs on the racetrack, not the highway, and covering a car as newsworthy is not the same as endorsing everything it represents, which, as it happens, is precisely what I'm going to be doing today. But before I get there, did you know that we're only here because of our amazing community of supporters? Unlike a lot of channels, we don't take big advertorial sponsorship deals, and frankly, if we did, I doubt we'd have as much freedom to make videos like this one. So instead, we rely on our amazing community of supporters on Patreon, YouTube, Discord, Fluxer, and Ko-fi. And if you become one of them from just $1.50 a month, you'll join the amazing list of people at the end of the show. You'll find links down below if you'd like to join and help us out, plus links on our channel, and we don't believe in paywalls, so you'll find us in the federated universe too. As I noted in the opening, last week, Ferrari unveiled its first all-electric model in the form of the Luce, a massive departure from the brand's usual heavy reliance on throaty, big-capacity engines. The Luce is powered by a sizable 800-volt, 122-kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack with cells co-developed by SK On. Providing the motive power is a quartet of electric motors, totaling 620 kilowatts at the rear and 210 kilowatts at the front, for a combined peak output of 772 kilowatts. All of that does the 0 to 100 kilometer per hour sprint in 2.5 seconds, and it'll go on to a top speed of 310 kilometers per hour, just under 193 miles per hour. And rather than be a 2-seat sports car, this is a 4-door, 5-seat coupe with the chops to be treated as a grand tourer. And it has fast charging support at up to 350 kilowatts at a compatible charging station and a target range of 530 kilometres, around 329 miles, pending homologation. It does, on paper at least, sit within the expected performance and range envelope for a high-performance EV. And at this point, I'd be remiss not to note that those figures aren't revolutionary, even by Ferrari's own standards. The brand has built quicker, it's built faster. I'll come back to that, but on paper at least, the specs aren't ridiculously terrible. But the design... that's something else. See, while Ferrari is very eager to let everyone know the Luce will be hand-built at its factories just like the cars that came before, it was designed by British-born industrial designer Jony. He of the see-through iMac and iBook of the late 1990s and early 2000s, the man behind the original iPhone and iPod, and whose design exposition videos focus on superlatives and emotional evocations, all delivered with the soft-spoken surety of your college roommate after their first edible.
The MacBook is our most popular Mac. But what we've done, and we've made a habit of doing this at Apple, is we decided just to start high.
I was gonna clean my room until I got high.
And that design? It's not like anything we've seen before from Ferrari. From the outside, it frankly looks like a love child of a Nissan Leaf and a Faraday Future FF91, with some influences of other vehicle designs that clearly got in on the action too, if you know what I'm talking about. It was apparently quite the evening. Inside, meanwhile, the seating position sits closer to a traditional Ferrari. The interior has moved decisively away from analog controls, with a multi-clustered digital dash dominating the cabin, and the driver instrument cluster is almost the same size as the centre console, which, by the way, sits proud on a movable arm, allowing the driver to angle it just so. Sorry. To put it bluntly, this isn't your parents' or indeed your grandparents' Ferrari. Not that they probably owned one. Now, of course, we're not the type of channel to be invited to Italy to see and experience this car for ourselves, and that's totally okay. Unlike the AMG 4-door coupe I was drooling over a few weeks back, which is actually an exercise in efficient engineering designed to squeeze out as much range from the car while also offering impeccable performance, the Luce is, as I hinted earlier, most likely a car that will spend most of its time in a collection. Its €550,000 price tag in base form, about 6 times the price of the entry-level Mercedes-Benz AMG GT4 Tour Coupe if the incoming electric version keeps a similar price point to the mild hybrid it replaced, only cements that further. On paper, that will help Ferrari survive. This is a company that has spent a considerable amount of time and money advocating for exemptions from EU emissions regulations, pushing for e-fuels, carve-outs, small volume manufacturer flexibilities, and softer electrification targets. A company that has consistently used every available mechanism to slow walk its own transition to electric. And a company whose 2030 electric ambitions have been quietly halved, from 40% of the lineup to just 20%, while the second EV has been pushed back to at least 2028, with sources internally describing sustainable demand for an electric Ferrari as non-existent. So Ferrari needs the Luce to sell. It needs its loyal and extraordinarily wealthy customers to buy it and park it alongside the other Ferraris in their collection. The billionaires, the oil barons, the sultans. And yes, the authoritarian strongman whose names occasionally appear on supercar registrations. These are Ferrari's people now, not the kid with the poster on the bedroom wall. And they will buy an electric car, even if, as the broader pattern of their acquisitions suggests, electric isn't really their thing. Unfortunately, it's a pattern we're seeing across the hyper-luxe segment. Even Rimac, a company literally founded as an EV brand, has signalled that its Nevera successor will likely have a combustion engine. Not because electric has failed, but because the ultra-wealthy buyers Rimac built its business around and relies on simply stopped finding electric cars special. Rimac pledged to build 150 Neveras. Years later, build slots are still available for the best-selling electric hypercar in the world. But Ferrari knows that. So too does the stock market. As I noted earlier, in the hours after the reveal, Ferrari's share price dropped nearly 8%. And here's the thing, if that had happened to Ford or General Motors or Stellantis, we'd be talking about emergency board meetings, analyst downgrades, and speculation about the CEO's future. There would be blood in the water. But Ferrari? Ferrari got memes. People joked about the Luce needing to be flipped upside down to charge, a reference to one of Jony Ive's other infamous design decisions, the Apple Magic Mouse, which, if you don't know, requires exactly that undignified treatment to recharge. And beyond the jokes, even those with deep ties to the brand were largely dismissive. Because Ferrari isn't Ford, it doesn't answer to the same market logic. It answers to a much smaller, much wealthier constituency, one that will ultimately decide whether the Luce lives or dies by not buying one to drive, but by buying one to own. And if Ferrari continues to receive the same kind of public backlash it's currently generating from fans and hardened petrolheads, that's exactly the excuse it needs to declare EVs a failed experiment. I don't want this video to sound conspiratorial, I really don't, but it is genuinely difficult at this particular moment in history not to wonder whether a hypercar brand that spent years dismissing electrification and reportedly punting the plug down the road is going to do everything in its power to make sure this doesn't work, because, hand on heart, I think it might.
Oh, that's terrible.
Which brings me to my biggest issue with all of this, because this reveal is a perfect split screen, highlighting the haves and the have-nots, the difference between the needs and the wants, and the growing disparity between legacy brands half-heartedly playing catch-up while more agile, better-prepared competitors are busy eating their lunch. And any way you slice it, well, the Ferrari Luce is bad timing. Yes, okay, I know there is a risk that I'm sounding like a hypocrite here. Fair enough. Especially after admitting that I'd love to drive a pretty expensive AMG GT EV. But here is the difference. Said model is built on a platform that is genuinely pushing the boundaries of what's producible at scale. It's got axial flux motors that are 67% lighter and smaller than conventional units, a battery that can charge 250 miles of range in around 5 minutes, and manufacturing processes novel enough to generate 30 patents just on how to build the motors. The Luce, meanwhile, has engineering achievements too, but if you read the small print, most of them are Ferrari firsts rather than industry firsts. Ferrari catching up to where the rest of the industry already is what we're looking at here. A €550,000 ticket. One of these cars is pushing the technology forwards. The other is a very expensive, very beautiful object for very rich people, and frankly, it knows it. Right now, around the world, ordinary people are making genuinely difficult choices about whether they can afford to fill their tank and get to work. Fuel costs remain punishingly high and ridiculously unpredictable. And the irony is that there are so many affordable, reliable, low-emission electric vehicles that could help them. Cars that would let people dump the pump for good. But in many markets, these cars are being kept out. Legislators in the US, the EU and elsewhere have erected significant barriers against more affordable Chinese-made EVs, citing concerns about cybersecurity and IP theft that, while not entirely without basis, could quite easily be addressed through regulation rather than outright bans. The hard truth is that much of this is straightforward protectionism, and the people paying that price for protectionism aren't the shareholders. They're the ones still standing at the pump, trying to afford to fill up. A recent series of surveys in Canada, which, by the way, earlier this year struck a deal with China to allow Chinese-made EVs to be imported into Canada in limited numbers by slashing tariffs from 100% down to just 6.1%, paint a pretty clear picture of where ordinary customers stand on Chinese EVs. An Auto Pacific survey found that 67% of Canadian new vehicle shoppers are already familiar with Chinese auto brands, and 55% would consider buying one if they were available. A separate JD Power study found that among serious EV shoppers, 56% would consider a Chinese EV brand, with price being the dominant factor. And an Auto Trader survey of nearly 1,800 Canadians found that 53% of them were interested in Chinese EVs, with 74% of those citing pricing as the main reason for their interest. That is not a fringe position, that's a majority. And the models beginning to arrive in Canada right now, they're better priced and better spec'd than much of the domestic competition. Which brings me to the crux of what the Ferrari Luce demonstrates so perfectly. Legacy automakers are losing ground, in some cases rapidly, to better built, better spec'd, more competitively engineered vehicles from elsewhere in the world. And nowhere is that contrast more stark than when you put the Ferrari Luce, €550,000, hand-built in Maranello, designed by the man who gave us the iPhone, next to the Xiaomi SU7 Ultra, the bonkers, record-smashing, high-performance variant of Xiaomi's first ever production car, a company that didn't even make cars 2 years ago. The Xiaomi SU7 Ultra is a production electric car that you can buy today in China for 529,900 yuan. That's roughly $73,000. Let that sink in for a second. $73,000 for a car that produces 1,548 horsepower from 3 electric motors, 2 at the rear, 1 at the front. A car that reaches 100 kilometers per hour, 62 miles per hour from standstill in 1.98 seconds. That's a half second quicker than the Ferrari Luce from a company that didn't make cars until 2024. It has a top speed of 350 kilometers per hour, which is 40 kilometers per hour faster than the Luce. And it holds the Nürburgring lap record for a 4-door production car, completing the circuit in 6 minutes and 46 seconds. It's so fast, in fact, that Xiaomi pushed an over-the-air software update to quietly restrict its output from 1,548 horsepower to just 900 horsepower for normal road driving in China, requiring owners to complete a qualifying lap at an improved racetrack to unlock the vehicle's full performance. Now, yes, owners did revolt, and Xiaomi reversed the update, which meant that the full 1,548 horsepower was restored. Over-the-air updates pushed remotely, restoring nearly 650 horsepower at the tap of a button. Now, Ferrari, for its part, hasn't mentioned OTA updates once in the 60-plus patents and several thousand words of press material. Sure, the Luce does make real, authentic sounds thanks to a patented system that captures and amplifies the actual mechanical noise of the electric axles and rotating components via a precision accelerometer rather than piping in some kind of synthetic engine from an onboard computer. And I'm going to be honest with you, I like that. I genuinely respect that. It is a thoughtful, principled approach to a problem that every EV company is currently wrestling with. But over-the-air updates? Not a word. For a €550,000 car launched in 2026, that is an interesting choice. And, in the spirit of fairness, the Xiaomi SU7 isn't without its own issues. A separate safety recall affected over 115,000 standard SU7s following a fatal accident involving the car's assisted driving system. Chinese EVs, like any emerging automotive technology from any auto manufacturer, are not without their growing pains. But here's the thing, at $73,000 equivalent versus, €550,000, let's be honest, for most people watching this, both of those cars might as well be on the moon. But the real question isn't which hypercar represents better value, it's why in 2026, with fuel prices where they are and the climate where it is, the conversation is still being dominated by cars that ordinary people will never, ever own. Which brings me back to where we started. The bedroom wall, the smartphone screen, the moment a 10-year-old sees a car and thinks, someday, maybe, if everything goes right. And I can't genuinely see the Ferrari Luce doing that for anyone. And I've tried. I really have tried. Now, the original Tesla Roadster, unobtainium for almost everyone who wanted one at launch, still had a raw, world-changing, what on earth is that? This is the future kind of vibe that made you stop and stare. And I'll be honest, it remains my all-time favourite Tesla. In fact, it is the only Tesla that I would buy in a heartbeat if I had the money sitting in the bank. And if I could find a way to service it that didn't involve giving any money to a certain South African billionaire with political ambitions and a very active social media presence, I might. But that's another problem for another day. Now, the Ioniq 5N might make some people's pulse quicken just looking at it, and you might actually be able to own one someday. Although, honestly, that faux gear shift, that fake engine noise, the Ioniq 5N, no, sorry. Even the humble Mustang Mach-E, controversial as it is, might at least make some of you feel something in, you know. But you know what genuinely excites me? A car that isn't even in production yet. BMW's upcoming electric M3, which is due sometime next year, has 4 independent electric motors. It has 1 per wheel. It has no mechanical differentials. It is offering somewhere in the region of 700 to 800 horsepower delivered instantly and independently to each wheel. Now, engineers who have been explicit about this car state that it cannot afford to feel experimental. A car designed by BMW from the ground up to reward a skilled driver, to be repeatable, to have clear limits that you can find and push against. And that is what Ferrari used to offer. The poster on the wall that had genuinely impossible engineering behind it, that somehow was the marriage of everything you wanted and didn't even know yet how to do. But the Luce? It makes you think of a very expensive laptop, a beautiful, considered, meticulously engineered, very expensive laptop. Designed, and I can say this with complete affection for his other work, a man whose greatest hits include a mouse that you have to flip upside down to charge. It's not a poster car. It's not a dream car. It's a signal to all the other billionaires that you've grown tired of your Hublot collection, your F40 is in the shop being restored, and you simply must have something to fill the gap while it's gone. And the worst of it is that it doesn't look, or at least feel at any first glance, to have any of the chops to back up its price tag. Because in 2026, with everything that's happening in the world right now, with every argument that needs to be won about why electric vehicles matter, the Ferrari Luce will be purchased by the very same people, the oil barons, the sultans, and yes, the authoritarian strongman, who are also ploughing scads of money into making sure that the world continues the way it has. Pouring money into political campaigns and fossil fuel investments designed to keep the world exactly as it is right now. Designed to keep the pump running, to keep the affordable, game-changing EVs off the road, and helping to keep the argument alive that electric vehicles are a plaything of the wealthy. And with the Luce, Ferrari just handed them the perfect Exhibit A. Because, well, those legacy automakers might have too much egg on their face otherwise. The Ferrari Luce. Yeah, Luce means light. But honestly, that is not the kind of light we need right now.
The face of the product is pretty much defined by a single piece of multi-touch glass, and that's it. I don't have to change myself to fit the product. It fits me. When I don't know how we could make something any more essential, any simpler, to create something that's genuinely new, you have to start again. And I think with great intent, you disconnect from the past.
Thanks for watching to the end, and if you made it this far, you clearly have opinions about this, so let me know in the comments. Does the Ferrari Luce excite you? Disappoint you? Make you weep? Or angry? Or does it just make you want to go look up a poster of a Testarossa and feel something again? And as always, if I've got something wrong, corrections are welcome. Keep it civil though. Any threats will be removed and reported, and frankly, if you're that upset about my opinions on a $500,000 car, I gently suggest you have bigger things to worry about. We are 100% independent at this channel. We don't have any manufacturer access, no press trips to Italy, and no one telling us what to say. And if you like what we do and you'd like to help us stay that way, there's a link in the show notes to support us on Patreon from just $1.50 a month. You join the long list of amazing people scrolling by right here who make this channel possible. You can also support us on Ko-fi, grab some swag from our swag store like this t-shirt, and please hit subscribe. YouTube won't reliably tell you when we post, so follow us on social media or join our Discord or Fluxer chat rooms so you find out when those videos post. And I also promise, in those places, no one is trying to sell you a Ferrari. So thanks for watching, thanks for caring about all the things that actually matter, and until next time, keep evolving.